It is Saturday the 6th of February 2021, and for the longest time I've been wanting to jump on one of these video updates and share with you some groundbreaking, monumental news that is beneficial to all of humanity and is positive and uplifting in nature. I'm still waiting for some information of that type that I can share with you. And as I've mentioned before, the opinions and the guarantees and the promises of pundits as to certain things that are due to happen on certain dates don't count as news until such times as what they've been predicting or promising actually comes into physical manifestation. I don't know if you've noticed, but these pundits, in terms of predicting certain things that are going to happen on certain dates, have been wrong in 100% of cases, as far as I can make out so far. By the same token, another thing I don't want to be doing is adding to the avalanche of doom and gloom that's already out there. There's quite enough doomers already telling you the 101 different ways in which your life is fucked and your children have no future, without me needing to add to their voices as well. So what I prefer to do is to come on whenever I feel the inspiration to share a particular message or some insights or some observations with people. And so that's what I'm doing here today. Now, I think many people would agree that what we are witnessing happening in the UK right now, and in many other nations, demonstrably in the United States, in many nations throughout Europe, is the slow onset of Chinese-style communism, which is being rolled out under the guise, under the smokescreen of the plandemic. We've seen many different tenets of this coming to pass, such as the removal of joy and fun. That is a part of ideological communism. They want life to be dull, they want it to be drudge and routine and grey and soulless and joyless. And what have we seen over the past few months? Any opportunity to do anything vaguely enjoyable or to socialise or to spend your leisure time as you choose has been taken from us. At the same time, we've got the rollout of the World Economic Forum's Great Reset. For those that are paying attention, you won't have heard anything about it on the BBC Evening News or any other mainstream outlet because they're keeping this whole thing under wraps. But for people that can do their own research, they will be aware that the plan here is to strip people, the regular masses, of private ownership of anything, private possessions, your house, your car, or anything else. The idea is that everything will be owned by the state, which is another expression of communism, and you will own nothing. And you'll be happy with it, according to the mantra that's getting put out. We've also had the removal of rights and freedoms, the right to movement, the right to freedom of assembly, the right to socialise with who you wish, have who you wish in your own house. All of these freedoms have been deleted under the same agenda. So this is ideological communism by any other name. But what has happened is that this has had to have been slipped in under the radar, and it's been kept out of the mainstream media, where sadly the vast majority of people still get all their information from, and you won't have heard government spokespeople talking about this going on. They've had to be covert, they've had to be stealthy and sly about rolling all this stuff out. Why? Because if they'd come out blatantly and candidly and told everyone what they were doing, if they'd made a public announcement that we are going to take away your individual God-given rights and freedoms, we're going to take away all joy and all opportunities for fun and for socialising from your life. We're going to take away your private possessions. Everything you think you own is going to end up being owned by the state. We're going to restructure the financial system to benefit the elite few at the top of the pecking order, and so that everybody else gets put on some sort of universal credit, universal income wage, so that everyone is kept the same in society. That's what we're planning to do. Can you imagine what the response would have been to that, even among the sleeping, mask-wearing, snoring, slumbering masses? There would have been a major backlash and some pretty serious objections to that being applied in our lives without our consent, without our consultation, I like to think, if they'd come right out and said it in that way. The reason they've had to be sly and crafty about it. Ties in with many other things that have been done to us through the ages, many other aspects of our lives that are put into place against our will. We can think of the birth certificate fraud, which a lot of people are up on now. There's a lot of talk about this within common law circles, within the subjects of sovereignty. A lot of people are coming to comprehend how we've been tricked and lied to all our lives from the minute that our parents were bamboozled into applying that birth certificate. There's double meanings here. It's maritime admiralty law, it's legalese, and they've had to resort to this kind of trickery, this kind of underhand, sly behaviour in order to get it done. So as many people now comprehend, we are treated in this country and most other countries around the world under the birth certificate fraud as corporate entities that have been created in our name, that are separate from the individual sovereign flesh and blood man and woman that we represent. If the powers that be had been honest about this, if they'd explained to our parents that when they apply a birth certificate in our names when we're first born, in fact we are being registered as corporate entities and we're being traded on the stock market, and we're being seen as vessels that have no rights in creation because we're not considered human, we're not considered a man or a woman, we're something outside of that. If that had been explained to our parents, do you think any of them would have readily agreed to have signed their newborn children over into such a system? I was conned, I was tricked, I was duped into this very thing with my own kids. I knew no different back then. And to be fair, how could any of us when this just wasn't explained and this kind of information was not being exchanged back in those times? It's only in recent years that people have come to a full comprehension of this massive fraud, this outrageous deception that is foisted upon us. So again, addressing our current situation, if all over the world nations had been told by their governments that in fact COVID-19 has been a massive scam and it's being used as an excuse to get everybody obsessing about the virus, everybody running around in masks and worried about getting too close to the person in front of them, worried about how many people they can have around their house. In fact, all that is being done so that they can introduce communism that's been perfected in Chinese society. It's going to bring in things like the social credit system, facial recognition, the 5G grid, the Internet of Things, and you're going to have no possessions. It's all going to be taken from you under the World Economic Forum's Great Reset Master Plan. If it had been explained in that way, how many people do you think would have said, yeah, sounds all right to me. Yeah, I can go with that. No problem. Yeah, count me in. I like to think that even with the degraded state of human consciousness that we now have, there would have been a major objection if it had been explained in that way. So the very fact that the controllers have to resort to these underhand tactics, they have to lie, they have to deceive, they have to dupe, shows that they recognise that at our very core, as regular men and women, sovereign flesh and blood human beings, we have a natural inclination, propensity towards good. I know I've been very unkind and very critical of the slumbering masses, the useless eaters as the eugenicists think of them. That's not my phrase, that's the way they're viewed by the so-called elites. You know, the masses, the normies. I've been quite unkind about the ignorance and the cowardice that they've displayed during the last year, as it is now coming up on. But I still believe that at the core of regular men and women lies a knowledge that's instinctive, that is primal. It's a part of us, between right action and wrong action, between good and bad, between behaviours and ways of life that are acceptable, that are moral, that cause no harm to others, and those that are the opposite of that. This is what our so-called elite betters, as they like to think of themselves, lack. They lack this basic understanding of the principles of natural law, the difference between right and wrong in creation, morality, because They are psychopaths and sociopaths and narcissists. They do not have their full humanity intact. They're lacking in compassion. They're lacking in empathy. They realise that we have these qualities as an inherent part of us. And I feel in many cases they envy this because they don't understand it, because they're devoid of it, because many of them are primary psychopaths. And those that aren't have psychopathy bred into them. They become secondary psychopaths through being sexually abused and traumatized as children. You know, there's so much evidence of the fact that in so-called elite ruling class circles, in aristocratic bloodline families, they traumatize new generations of their own families, the children that come into these bloodlines, through sexually abusing them, through sexual satanic ritual abuse and trauma-based mind control. It's on record so many times that this goes on because they want the new generations of these classes to grow up as psychopaths so that they can't relate to that innate humanity that's there in the rest of us. So they recognise that we know right from wrong, and that if we were ever given the full detail and it were honestly and candidly explained to us what they plan to do, none of us would ever agree to it. Nobody in their right mind would say yes. This is why they do things like predictive programming in their TV shows and their movies. They're giving us an indication of what they plan to do, but they go about it in very cryptic, coded, symbolic form. And they expect us to be able to decode all of that and to know what they're trying to announce without them actually coming out and saying it in so many words. They feel that gets them off the karmic hook. They feel that they've then got our tacit, unspoken approval for what they wish to do. As I say, the very fact that they have to resort to such underhand tactics shows that they fear the fact that we know right from wrong, and we would never agree to being dominated and controlled and enslaved in the way that we are if they were honest about it. So it's always trickery. It's always deception. It's the same thing with the gun grab that they attempted in America under the Obama administration. They wanted to get guns out of the hands of American patriots because they knew what was coming. They knew they were going to unroll the COVID scamdemic. They knew that the Great Reset and this communist outreach was coming in 2020, 2021. And in an attempt to get the guns out of the hands of Americans so that they couldn't defend themselves when the shit hit the fan, they pulled off a whole load of false flag terror events, one after the other, year after year. They were so transparent, they were so obvious, they were all using crisis actors when you knew what to look for. But again, the very fact that they had to resort to that and try to trick and dupe people into believing that there were nutters running rampant with guns, and so it was no longer safe for private citizens to own firearms, therefore they had to give them all up so that we could prevent this kind of thing from happening in the future, shows that dynamic once again. They fear that if we were ever given the full detail, we would be mad, we wouldn't be having it, we wouldn't accept it. They've been doing this throughout history. They've lied to us in so many ways about everything because they can't tell the truth, because if they did, their reign of terror and slavery over the human population would be finished overnight. I saw a great article published this week titled, "Is the Globalist Reset Failing? We live in hope. The elites may have overplayed their hand." And it was put out by an American writer by the name of Brandon Smith. And I want to read an excerpt of what he wrote here because I feel it backs up everything that I've just said. And he puts it in a very eloquent form. So he wrote, "One aspect of narcissistic sociopaths that is important to remember is that they live in their own little world in which their desires and bizarre dysfunctions are normalized. They believe themselves superior to most people because they are predatory and they don't suffer from annoying hang-ups like empathy and conscience. Almost every aspect of the globalists and their behaviour indicates that they are a club cult of narcopaths, as he refers to them. Their obsessive need to control as well as to corrupt and destroy in order to get what they want is not an extension of mere greed. It is a deep-seated aspect of who they are as beings. It is a defining mechanism at the core of their character. They are real-world monsters like vampires attempting to blend into an unsuspecting population. Criminals tend to brag about their crimes when they think that it's too late for anyone to do anything about them. I predicted the globalists would be very open in revealing their agenda the moment they revealed themselves untouchable. For the freedom-loving public, this suggests that in 2020, going into 2021, that the elites must think there is nothing that can be done to stop the machine. They're so blatant in their calls for a global reset, a cashless society, totalitarian lockdowns and a surveillance state that no one in their right mind can claim these notions are conspiracy theory anymore. The fact is, the conspiracy theorists were right all along, and now there's nothing anyone can say about it. I've also argued in the past that the globalist push for a new world order is a double-edged sword that could very well end up annihilating them. As they attempt to initiate their reset agenda, they become more and more exposed. They can no longer lurk in the safety of the shadows, and there's no going back once the process has started. So I certainly hope that he's correct in his estimation that they may have overplayed their hand, and in their arrogance and their hubris and their inability to relate to the way the rest of the population thinks, to relate to our empathy and our compassion and our innate humanity. They may have severely overstepped the mark and made it too bloody obvious what they're trying to achieve at this time, because they just don't know when to rein it in. They don't know when enough is enough. They just keep pressing forward in their psychopathic desires and desperation. And you can see how desperate they're now getting for the pandemic narrative to continue to stick in the advertising campaign that the government has launched in the UK towards the nation, saying, act like you've got it. I mean, you couldn't make it up, and you don't have to. They're taking the piss. They're more or less saying, yeah, I know it's a scam, but can you just act like you've got it? You know, just pretend you've got it. Just play along with us, and if you act like you've got it, it will make it seem more scary and more widespread than it is. So, you know, can you do that for us? And here's another thing that smacks of their desperation for this COVID stunt to stick. Last week, I was having a conversation with this guy who told me that he'd worked in reality TV on some of these bloody awful trash programs, you know. I'm not going to name any names because he wouldn't appreciate it, but he was telling me, and I've got no reason to suspect he was lying, that he knows personally 3 very well-known names in the reality TV field, these pointless Z-list celebrities, you know. And in personal conversations he was having with them, they revealed to him, in each case, that the British government had paid them £70,000 each to promote the official COVID agenda. In other words, as influencers on social media and as people who, sadly, legions of fans look up to and hang on their every word, they were to reinforce the official government line on the pandemic. You know, stay at home, wear your mask, shut down your business, all this kind of thing. And they were also paid to state that they'd each had a family member who had contracted COVID. They hadn't. They were lying. They were paid to state falsely that someone in their family had suffered from COVID. How disgusting is it that the government would resort to these lengths to keep the lie going? But more than that, how disgusting and repulsive is it that an individual would actually accept that payment for telling those lies? I mean, what does that say about the human nature when it comes to these particular individuals? But that's the reality TV agenda for you, I guess. So Brandon Smith is absolutely right in that they do feel the need to brag about their crimes in as much as they feel they can get away with it. But they do still need their little stunts, such as the COVID scamdemic, to hide behind for plausible deniability to point to as justification for what they're doing should the heat get a bit too much for them. And there's no better example of them being completely out of touch with the way the average person thinks than Boris Johnson. Or to give him his full name, Alexander de Pfeffel Boris Johnson. Although the family name actually wasn't Johnson originally, it was Kemal, because the family came out of the Ottoman Empire in Turkey. That was Boris Johnson's grandfather. Then the family name was changed from Kemal to Johnson to make him sound less Turkish and more British. And de Pfeffel, where the hell does that come from? So Boris Johnson likes to think he's in touch with the way the British people think.
Yes, it's Boris de Pfeffel Johnson, and I absolutely understand the way the regular working man and woman thinks in the nation. Yes, I'm the best person to represent them. I went to Eton, you know. Buggered senseless in the dorms I was. Oxford University, and my middle name's de Pfeffel. I mean, that's a nice common name, isn't it? There's lots of people called de Pfeffel.
In other Boris Johnson news, I see that he has been criticised for not wanting to apply trade sanctions with nations that endorse genocide. You couldn't make it up. This is with specific reference to China's Xinjiang province and that Uyghur Muslims that live there. I've probably got the pronunciation wrong, but this particular group in China have been persecuted for many, many years. And there have been calls around the world for sanctions to be applied against China in opposition to this. But Johnson has decided that he doesn't want to nail his colours to that particular mast, and he won't be publicly shaming and dismissing the idea of genocide. How could he when he's been committing genocide against the people of his own nation, along with fraud, treason, crimes against humanity, malfeasance, sedition, and domestic terrorism? One day, I like to think, all this will come to catch him up. And Hancock, talking of psychopaths, Matt Hancock, you saw him the other week laughing on the TV with Piers Morgan as he talks about the rollout of the first vaccines. And they've got an old guy by the name of William Shakespeare. And in all seriousness, they're asking us to believe that that's his real name, when in fact they're telling us symbolically that the whole thing is theatre and it's a tragedy. And what's Matt Hancock doing as he talks about William Shakespeare receiving one of the first vaccines? He's fucking laughing. He's laughing. He's laughing at you. He's laughing at me. And it gets framed on the TV show by Piers Morgan, and when it's reported in the papers, as Matt Hancock being overcome with emotion. He's crying because it's been such a long path up to this point to get the vaccine out, and finally we're there, and he's overcome with emotion. They are taking the piss. Matt Hancock was laughing because he's a fucking psychopath, and that's what psychopaths do. They have no empathy, they have no compassion, they can't relate to what life is like for regular people like you and me. And these are the individuals that are calling the shots in our nations and telling us what we can and can't do, and who we can and cannot have in our own houses, and whether or not we can go and operate our own businesses that we ourselves have built up. How much more are we going to take of this? I know this doesn't need to be addressed to most people that will be watching this video. This is something that needs to be addressed to the slumbering masses that are still labouring under the delusion that somehow their government cares about them and wants to keep them safe, and there's a beastly virus out there and they're doing all they can to protect us from it because they care. That's why they got into politics, because they're lovely people with big hearts. I'm now a content creator for a new platform, which is much needed. We all know what the mainstream media is all about and the lies that they peddle and the poison and the bile that they put out there. So now more than ever, alternative ways of sharing empowering information are needed, and a new platform came online this last week. It is the One Great Work Network. That's what the t-shirt here relates to. This is coming from Mark Passio of whatonearthishappening.com. It's a long-time project of his that he's wanted to introduce for some years now. It's finally online. You can find it at onegreatworknetwork.com, and there's a whole load of content creators on there that are sharing information and resources pertaining to truth and freedom and natural law and spiritual teachings. And I'm happy to say that I'm one of the featured content creators. I've got my own page on that network. There's a few videos up on there at the moment just to get things started. What I want to do in due course is to upload the entirety of my Sound of Freedom Conscious Music podcast. So I'm up to 102 volumes on that. The thing about it is, all the shows that I've put together so far are in audio only form. So they're MP3s and WAVs. And to get uploaded to this network, for the maximum impact, they really need to be in a video format, MP4 MPEGs. Now, converting 102 shows from audio only to video is quite a time-consuming process, and it's one that I honestly am unable to take on my workload at the moment. I'm continuing to get on with the writing of Musical Truth Volume 3. I'm happy to report that's going really well. I've made a huge impact. I've got many, many thousands of words written, and that book is on target to be out well before the end of this year. But I want to concentrate most of my efforts this year on getting that book finished, which means I'll be limited in other tasks that I can do. So if there is anyone watching this that has the technical skills and the time and the will to assist in getting these audio files converted into a video form for uploading on the One Great Work Network, please drop me an email to the address that I'll put in the show notes below, and maybe you can help me out with getting this job done. Many thanks in advance. Couple of shows to mention this week. I did a Good Vibrations volume with Christopher James of A Warrior Calls out of Canada. That went on my channel last week, and he's talking about common law solutions to the problems we face in our various nations, the restoration of common law as a system that trumps all other systems of so-called law and legislation. Great information. Chris speaks at about 500 miles an hour. You can ask him a question, and you can sort of go for a run and have a sandwich and take a bath and mow the lawn. And by the time you get back, he's still speaking. So that was a great show. It's had a really good response. I'm going to be doing another show talking about common law this coming week with a guy by the name of John Smith out of Scotland. So this is with specific reference to common law application in the UK. So watch out for that one coming soon. John Smith on Good Vibrations. I did a show the other day with John Hamer, good friend of mine, very prolific author and researcher. He's got a new book out called The Falsification of Science, which is very topical for these times. It follows in the footsteps of his previous work, The Falsification of History. And it's an absolutely mammoth marathon undertaking, a huge book going into so many different subject areas. So in the show we did the other day, we touched on just a few of these. We talked about the Big Bang Theory. We talked about evolution, Darwin's theory of evolution, all these atheistic belief systems that have been taught through establishment sources for generations now and are just perceived wisdom, so-called. They're just accepted by so many people as the way it is, truth. It must be, because the scientific community says it's so. But John has applied a huge amount of scrutiny to all these things that we're told from birth. The true cosmology of the place that we live. We're told that we live on a spinning ball hurtling through space. We're told that dinosaurs once existed on Earth, but they were wiped out by an asteroid, and that this could happen to us at any moment because life is fragile like that and it's ultimately meaningless like that, according to those atheistic belief systems. We got into the Royal Society and the fact that so many of the people that give us these theories, and let's remember they are just theories, somebody's idea of something rather than proven scientific fact, they all seem to emanate out of this organisation called the Royal Society, and this has been the case for generations as well. So I got into all of that with John Hamer. If you've not heard the show yet, look back in the YouTube archives, or if you're watching this on BitChute, you'll find it there as well, and take a listen to what John had to say. We're going to be doing another show next month in March, talking about some more aspects of that. I did actually pick up another YouTube channel strike this week, and this was over the video that I put out with Christopher James I just mentioned. Apparently, what he had to say amounted to medical misinformation. Well, it must be so if the YouTube fact checkers say it, right? So they applied another YouTube channel strike. This comes in the midst of a 30-day Facebook ban that I'm currently on. That will get lifted around about the 1st of March. Also, I got locked out of my Skype this week for some reason. I attempted to do a couple of shows on Skype. Every time I go to log in, it kicks me out. I've tried re-registering with a new password, a new login name. It's not having it. It's kicking me out. Skype don't seem to want me on board anymore. So, you know, the censorship and the attempts at keeping alternative voices from being heard continues, and it only makes us try all the more. It makes us get up a couple of minutes earlier in the morning so that we can achieve even more than we were before, because we won't be beaten by this. Also, in the last few days, I guested on a show called Living Outside the Matrix with Nigel Howitt. I did a show with him a few months ago. We had a really great conversation the other day. It was with specific reference to the music industry and entertainment generally, and looking at what the responses have been to prominent household names from the music business and other aspects of entertainment to the COVID scamdemic. So I pulled no punches and minced no words in this one. I just said what needed to be said, and I called out some names who have been propping up the official narrative of COVID, doing what they're told, like good little owned pet poodle lifetime actors. There are very few honourable exceptions that have been calling out the scam and have been drawing attention to the many things that don't add up and the immorality and the savagery of the government lockdowns. So I mentioned some of those names as well. So we're getting into all of that, and it was me talking about the music industry. A lot of what I mentioned to Nigel is going to be going in the new book, Musical Truth Volume 3. So it's entirely new information that I've not presented before. Just a quick mention of some protest events happening in Australia this month for the benefit of anyone that may be watching in Australia. Great to see that there's been some mobilisation there of some protest events happening in various different cities around Australia. The weather will be great out there right now. It's summer, it's nice to be outside, and it's great to see some kickback and some resistance coming from people in Australia. I'll put a link in the show notes below to where you can grab the flyer to find out what events are happening where this month. And I think that's pretty much it for this time round. In terms of YouTube strikes and channel takedowns and all of that, who knows what's going to happen, but one place you can always find my information, whatever else happens, is my own website. Nothing's going to be happening to that, and that's djmarkdevlin.com, which remains the one-stop shop for all my output. Catch you next time. Who knows, I may even have some good news to impart. Wouldn't that be a novelty?